Hey now, today we're going to take a look at the Bioshock Infinite Siege of Columbia board game from Plaid Hat Games. As the name implies, this is based off of the Bioshock Infinite video game, which I have not played. In fact, I have not played any of the Bioshock video games. And I know, that probably means I should turn in my geek card and have it cut up by someone. But nevertheless, I have played the board game, and I hope you'll accept my opinion on that in and of itself. Now, in the video game, it's a first-person shooter game where you play control of this person named Booker, who's trying to get this girl, Elizabeth, out of this floating city in an alternate universe version of the United States, while there's these two factions who are warring with each other, trying to make life miserable for these two people. In the board game, the roles are flipped. You, the players, are taking control of those two factions, and Booker and Elizabeth are actually controlled by the game, running around the board, basically wreaking havoc, which may or may not work out for you depending on whose territory it's actually affecting. But that's what this is. This is an area control combat game taking place over the map of this floating city known as Columbia, I think. So let's go ahead and take a look at how the game is played, and then we're going to come back and I'll let you know whether it lives up to as a suitable homage to the video game. Not that I would know that, actually. Sorry. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Bioshock Infinite Siege of Columbia board game, and I don't have time to go over every single little detail. I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of what the game is like. So, this is based on the Bioshock Infinite video game, and as such, the players take control of different warring factions in the floating city of Columbia, which is depicted by the game board here. Now, one thing I'll mention is that this game really should be played with 2 players, but you have the capability to play it with 4 players. Hence, there's going to be a blue player and a red player, but there's 2 different sets of minis and cards as well that you actually just mix together if you're only playing with 2 players. That's why you see different colored minis for each faction. They're really all the same. It's just if you're playing a 4-player game, you would play in teams with each player taking control of a different shade of miniature. It's kind of weird the way that works. So you'll set up the game board here. You have these little force tokens out here, which represent different hostile forces around the board in areas that are not already occupied by enemies that you might have to subdue and get money from. And really, the goal of the game here is to get 10 victory points. The first person to get the 10 victory points is going to win the game. You're going to get those victory points by completing these objective cards. And the objective cards, let me just get this in focus here, say things like firepower. You control a location with 3 turrets on them. Another example, infestation. Your faction controls at least 1 unit in every territory. You're going to get 4 points for that, so that's a pretty good one, but it's hard to do. Destruction. You destroy 1 enemy stronghold, and the strongholds are these little tokens that you'll start with 2 of them, 1 for each faction, out on the board, and more may come out later. And here are the turrets that other card referenced. Each player has these little common units as well, which are the rank and file of your forces moving around the board. Each player will have leader units, which have these little star bases, and they get to use better dice during combat. And their most powerful units are some of the more fearsome creatures from the game. Like I think this is called the Songbird for the blue forces, and then the Zeppelin for the red forces. So you have all these little miniatures out here. The game is really an area control game, so you're trying to get those different tokens, but you're also trying to wipe out and keep enemy forces at bay, moving around the board. You have cool zipline tactics around the board here too, so you can move quickly, but if you do so, you have to roll these dice, and if you don't get thumbs up on the dice, then you may fall and plummet to your death, which I think was an aspect of the video game as well, so they were trying to keep it cool and thematic to that. Now, in the video game, you actually take control of a person named Booker who's trying to get this girl named Elizabeth, who's got like time-bending and reality-bending powers. You're trying to get her to safety, and that's actually represented by these cards. There's actually 3 of them in the game, and you'll choose one at random at the beginning, and this is different effects that will happen with Elizabeth during the course of the game when special things happen. For instance, if one of the special world event cards comes out and it has the Elizabeth face on it, then you actually move the Elizabeth marker down, and that's going to change the course of the game. So, for instance, it says and also where Booker himself is, because Booker will be moving around the board and trying to destroy enemy forces, which you are the enemies, both players. So, for instance, if Elizabeth moved down to this spot, it says Booker convinces Elizabeth to escape with him on an airship. Place the airship on the same space as Elizabeth. Immediately resolve any combat that takes place. So that would just immediately move the airship, whether the red player likes it or not. So these are just sort of random effects that might happen during the course of the game. Now, some of the main activities that you're going to be doing during the course of the game are voting. You're always going to have a world vote. You'll have these special world event cards that will come out, and you and the other competing player have to vote to decide whether or not this card is actually going to take effect. So the Patriots Rejoice card, each founder may choose to upgrade an action card of their choice. Well, obviously that's good for the founder, but not so good for the red player, the Vox Populi. So the Vox Populi may want that to fail, but it all comes down to how many action cards you're willing to spend to make that succeed or fail. And that's what the main decks of cards for each player represent. They are action cards that can be used in several different ways. They can either be used for their special effects down at the bottom. They can be used to increase your combat strength, which is the red number. Like I was just saying, you can use them to increase votes, which is the yellow number, or you can use them to get these eagles, which are the currency of the game, which you can use for upgrades. Now, of course, combat is one of the main things you're going to be doing during the course of the game, and that's resolved very simply. Each different unit has a different die that represents them. So the weakest units have the white dice, which only have they only have, I think, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's pretty weak. But then the songbirds, I think some of the strongest units get the blue die, which is 3. Maybe it's the leaders that get this 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's stronger. Then you have the red dice, which are even stronger than that, which go 3, 4, 5, and 8 on the die. And these are actually the dice. Booker gets to roll 3 red dice during combat, so he is the main character of the game. He is incredibly hard to defeat should you have to face him. So keep that in mind. But when you're doing combat, you see how many dice you get to roll for whatever units are involved in the combat. When someone initiates it, when you try to move on to their turf, you'll roll those dice, but actually before that, you get to play your action cards, the ones that I showed you before. Whatever you want to use for combat in that regard, you'll actually, however many cards you want to play, you'll add those numbers to the amount that come up on the dice. Whoever has a higher number is the winner. Whoever wins destroys an enemy stronghold or turret in the spot, then kills one of the actual living units that's there and forces them to retreat back to one of their other strongholds. So combat's pretty simple in this game. And yeah, there's a lot of other stuff I could go over, but that's the gist of it. You're really just moving around the map. It's a dudes on the map game, trying to crowd out your opponents, trying to meet the conditions of these victory point cards, and trying to deal with the ramifications of the actions of Booker and Elizabeth. So let's get to my final thoughts. Well, I've already said that I can't speak to the theme of this game as it relates to the video game, just because I don't have that experience. I don't know much about the story, so I probably didn't appreciate that aspect of the game as much as I would have. But I did think that there were some parts of the theme in the storyline that were very cool. It's definitely, all of the artwork and everything on the board definitely brings out this world. It's a beautiful looking game. And the aspects of Booker and Elizabeth running around, and Elizabeth with her sort of reality-bending powers, that was a neat thing. And having immersed myself in all of this through the board game, it made me want to check out the video game. So I would say the theme is a success in that regard. And again, people who have played and enjoyed, I presume, the video game would probably get the most enjoyment out of the theme here. As far as components, it's a Plaid Hat game. All Plaid Hat games look really, really good. Even a simple, quote-unquote, simple card game like Summoner Wars just looks fantastic out on the table. And Bioshock Infinite Siege of Columbia is no exception here. The minis are great, even though they are board game minis. They're still great. All the artwork I already said looked really, really good. The board and all the tiles are really thick and good quality. Even the box looks fantastic. So nothing to say bad there. In fact, nothing but good things to say. But for the gameplay, I know that there are people who are going to want to jump through their screens and throttle me when I say this, but this game is complicated Risk. And it's not the only game like this I've played, but it's definitely one of the more fiddly and mediocre ones. And I'm really sorry to say that no matter how good the theme might be and how cool some of the individual mechanisms going on are, like the Elizabeth and Booker aspect, it's still just complicated Risk, and it's just not that fun. In fact, in some ways, it's as long as Risk, which is probably the cardinal sin of this game. And actually, let me say this now. I should have mentioned this briefly in the introduction. This game is really for 2 players. Yes, you can play it with 4, and how you do that is play on teams. That's why if you're playing with 2 players, there's dark blue and light blue. One player takes control of all those. And then light red and dark red, the other player takes control of all those. And if you're in team games, you split up those different colors. Don't do that. Just don't. I tried it, and it is so overwhelmingly long and boring. And every time I mention the length of a game and that it's a problem, people say, well, I could play this game in 90 minutes. What are you talking about? That is really if you played the game like 10 times and you were just like, moving everything around as quickly as possible, keeping yourselves on an internal timer. Yes, then you can get this game down to a reasonable length of time, a couple of hours. But that is very rarely going to happen. With 4 players, the game is going to slog on to 3 or 4 hours at least. And with a 2-player game, even that's a bit longer than I would like, 90 to 120 minutes, again, depending on how much experience you have with the game. So that's one of my biggest faults with it. And that whole time, one of the things that's exasperating that is the fiddliness of the game, going through all the different steps and the phases and during the world phase and keeping track of all the army units and military and what Booker and Elizabeth do. It's all great concepts, kind of fiddly in practice. Probably use that word too much, but this is the definition of a fiddly game and of an Ameritrash fiddly game. Now, there's some really cool things here, and I like that it's not exactly like Risk in the sense that you don't have to wipe out your opponent. You're just going for strategic points and just trying to get as many points as possible. But at the same time, it's still generic area control. It's still, I get a big swarm of dudes here, and I move them here. A dude's on the map game. I try to take out your dudes. And there's nothing that innovative in how that's carried out, even with player powers, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I've seen this all a million times before. And now, one of the neatest things, or what should be the neatest thing about the game, is the skyline aspect, which was another aspect from the video game that carried over, where I guess in the video game, Booker always traveled that way, like zipping along these, I guess zip lines is a better word, to get to enemies and take them out very easily. And here, ideally, how you would want to do that is to get a big force, an army, and go behind enemy lines, sneak up on them when they're like across the map, and you wouldn't normally think that they're there. In fact, you really have to make a big play like that if you really want to come out on top. That's kind of what the game builds up to, getting this huge force, and if someone's turtling up, just sneak behind them and make that big play, and make a big objective play there. But that could work. It could also be a total disaster. And that's the problem, is that the game is just so random. Again, like Risk. You could just get totally decimated with that group. You could have this huge army and be like, all right, guys, let's go, yeah! And by the time you get there, there's like one guy left, and you're like, yay! Standing up to this big force from your opponent. And even then in combat, it's still random dice rolls, hoping for the best. I don't know. It's a beautiful to look at, cool theme, cool ideas at play. But for me, it's just, I've played this game before. I've played it before, just not with as much polish. Not just with Risk, but other types of area control, like the newest Level 7 game. It just wasn't for me. I wish that it was. Maybe, again, I'll keep saying this, if you've played the video game and enjoyed it, maybe that level of appreciation will put you over the top and let you deal with the sort of warts that this game has. But for me, it was just generic and okay. Just barely average, which is kind of disappointing because Plaid Hat, other than maybe City of Remnants, I have known them to be a good quality company, but I think this is one of their missteps. And I think it's why, despite the theme and how popular the video game was, you don't hear anyone talking about this game or see anyone playing this game. It's just kind of quietly been shoved under the rug, and maybe that's for the best.